Most empaths don't realize they're in phase one while they're living it. In fact, if you ask them, they would probably describe it as love. They would call it kindness, compassion, loyalty, understanding. They would proudly say they're the person who never gives up on people. And that's exactly why this phase is so powerful, because it doesn't feel wrong, it feels noble. The empath becomes the person everyone runs to when life falls apart. They're the late night phone call, the emotional support system, the one who listens for hours without complaining, the one who always understands even when nobody understands them. At first, this role feels rewarding. It gives them purpose. It gives them identity. It gives them a sense of value. Every time they help someone through a crisis, they feel needed. Every time they calm someone down, they feel important. Every time they carry another person's emotional burden, they feel connected. But underneath all of this is a truth most empaths don't discover until much later. They're not just helping people. They're building their identity around helping people. And that's where phase one quietly begins. The empath starts believing that love means sacrifice. The more they give, the more they care, the more they tolerate, the more loyal they are, the more pain they endure, the stronger the relationship must be. Without realizing it, they create an invisible equation inside their mind. Love equals self-sacrifice. And once that belief takes root, it starts influencing every relationship they enter. They become attracted to wounded people, people who need help, people with emotional baggage, people who seem lost. Because deep down, the empath feels most valuable when they're rescuing someone. It's not a conscious decision. It's an emotional pattern. They meet someone struggling, and immediately their heart opens. They see potential where others see problems. They see the good hidden beneath the chaos. They see the wounded child behind the difficult behavior. And while everyone else is walking away, the empath stays. Again and again, relationship after relationship, friendship after friendship, they become the person who gives second chances, then third chances, then 10th chances, because they believe that if they just love hard enough, understand deeply enough, and stay patient long enough, eventually the other person will change. Eventually the other person will heal. Eventually everything will work out. But here's the painful part. The empath rarely asks one important question. Who's taking care of me? Their focus becomes so locked onto everyone else's emotions that they slowly lose touch with their own. They're always checking on others, always helping on others, always worrying about others. Meanwhile, their own needs sit quietly in the background, ignored, denied, postponed. They convince themselves they'll rest later, heal later, focus on themselves later, but later never seems to arrive. Because someone always needs them. Someone always has a problem. Someone always requires their attention. And the empath keeps giving, not because anyone forces them to, because giving has become part of who they are. The strange thing is that phase one often looks beautiful from the outside. People admire the empath. They praise their kindness. They appreciate their generosity. They describe them as selfless. But what nobody sees is the exhaustion slowly building beneath the surface. What nobody sees is how much emotional weight they're carrying. What nobody sees is that the empath is beginning to confuse their worth with their usefulness. If they're helping someone, they feel valuable. If they're saving someone, they feel important. If they're needed, they feel loved. And that's what makes phase one so dangerous. Because it teaches the empath to earn love rather than simply receive it. It teaches them that their role is to heal everyone around them. It teaches them that other people's happiness is somehow their responsibility. For a while, this belief feels empowering, but eventually, life will introduce a lesson that changes everything. A lesson so painful that it forces the empath to question the very identity they've spent years building. And that's the moment phase one begins coming to an end. This is the phase most empaths never see coming. Phase one feels meaningful. It feels like purpose. It feels like love. But phase two feels like everything is falling apart. And that's exactly why it's the hardest phase. Because for the first time in their life, the empath begins noticing something they spent years trying not to see. No matter how much they give, some people never change. No matter how much they sacrifice, some people never appreciate it. No matter how much they love, some relationships continue draining them. At first, they try to ignore it. They tell themselves they're just tired. They tell themselves things will get better. They tell themselves the other person is going through a difficult time. Just a little longer. just a little more patience, just a little more understanding. But deep down, something is starting to crack. The empath begins waking up emotionally exhausted. Conversations that once felt rewarding now feel heavy. People they once rushed to help now feel overwhelming. The emotional weight they've carried for years is becoming impossible to ignore. And that's when the painful questions begin appearing. Why am I always the one giving? Why do I feel responsible for everyone? Why do I keep ending up drained while others walk away unaffected? Why do I feel invisible despite doing so much for everyone else? Those questions are terrifying because they challenge the foundation of the empath's identity. Remember, phase 1 taught them that being needed equals being valuable. Now phase 2 begins exposing the cost of that belief. The empath starts noticing a pattern. Some people only call when they need something. Some people take support but never offer it. Some people enjoy being rescued but have no intention of changing. And suddenly the empath sees relationships through a completely different lens. What they once called loyalty starts looking like overgiving. What they once called patience starts looking like self-neglect. What they once called unconditional love starts looking like the fear of letting go. This realization doesn't feel empowering. It feels devastating. Because when your entire identity has been built around helping others, questioning that identity feels like losing yourself. The empath starts pulling back, not because they want to, because they have to. They're exhausted, emotionally depleted, mentally overwhelmed, and for perhaps the first time in their life, they realize they can't keep carrying everyone. That's when the guilt arrives. Powerful guilt. The empath feels selfish for creating boundaries. Selfish for saying no, selfish for choosing themselves. Even though those boundaries are desperately needed, this internal battle becomes one of the most painful experiences they'll ever face. Part of them knows they need to change. Another part fears becoming someone they don't recognize. If I'm not fixing people, who am I? If I'm not rescuing people, what is my purpose? If I'm not constantly needed, do I still matter? These questions can shake an empath to their core. Because phase 2 isn't just about losing unhealthy relationships. It's about losing an old version of yourself. The version that believed love had to be earned through sacrifice. The version that believed everyone could be saved. The version that believed their worth depended on how much they gave away. And letting go of that version feels like grief. Real grief. Some friendships begin fading. Some relationships become uncomfortable. Some people get angry when the empath stops overextending themselves. Others disappear completely. And while that hurts, it also reveals something important. Many people were attached to the empath's lack of boundaries, not the empath themselves. That realization is one of the hardest truths phase 2 has to offer, because now the empath is forced to see who truly values them and who simply valued access to their energy. For a while, this phase feels lonely, confusing, painful, like standing between two different lives. The old identity no longer fits. The new identity hasn't fully formed. Everything feels uncertain, but hidden inside this chaos is the beginning of something powerful. Because before an empath can become who they were meant to be, they must first stop being who everyone else needed them to be. And that painful awakening is what makes phase 2 the hardest and most transformative phase of all. As phase 2 continues, the empath begins encountering a truth that feels almost impossible to accept. In fact, this realization hurts more than most heartbreaks because it doesn't just change how they see other people. It changes how they see themselves. For years, the empath believed that enough love could change anyone. Enough patience could heal anyone. Enough understanding could reach anyone. If someone was hurting, the empath wanted to help. If someone was lost, the empath wanted to guide. If someone was struggling, the empath wanted to carry part of the burden. This belief felt beautiful. It felt compassionate. It felt like the right thing to do. But then life starts presenting evidence that doesn't fit the story. The empath notices something strange. The same people keep repeating the same mistakes. The same complaints keep showing up. The same problems keep returning. The same promises keep getting broken. At first, the empath searches for explanations. Maybe they're still healing. Maybe they're afraid. Maybe they need more support. Maybe they just need more time. So the empath gives more time, more energy, more understanding, more chances. But eventually, A painful pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Some people don't want solutions. They want comfort. Some people don't want growth. They want sympathy. Some people don't want to change. They simply want someone to stand beside them while they continue doing the same things. And for an empath, this realization can feel devastating because it challenges one of their deepest beliefs. The belief that if they care enough, they can help someone become the person they're capable of being. But growth doesn't work that way. Healing doesn't work that way. Change doesn't work that way. No matter how much wisdom you offer someone, they still have to choose it. No matter how much support you provide, they still have to take responsibility. No matter how much potential you see in them, they still have to decide whether they want to become that person. And that's where the empath experiences a kind of heartbreak few people talk about. Not the heartbreak of losing someone, the heartbreak of realizing you cannot save someone who doesn't want to save themselves. This realization creates frustration, sometimes anger, sometimes grief. The empath begins looking back at years of emotional investment, years spent trying to help people who weren't ready, years spent carrying burdens that never belonged to them. Years spent sacrificing their own peace in the hope that someone else would finally heal, and suddenly they see something they couldn't see before. Many of those battles were never theirs to fight. Many of those responsibilities were never theirs to carry. Many of those outcomes were never theirs to control. This is one of the most difficult lessons an empath will ever learn because it requires letting go of an illusion. The illusion of responsibility, the illusion that another person's healing depends on them, the illusion that love can do, the work that only personal accountability can do. At first, letting go feels wrong. It feels cold. It feels selfish. The empath worries they're becoming less caring, less compassionate, less loving. But what's actually happening is something very different. For the first time, they're learning the difference between support and responsibility. Support says, I'm here if you're willing to help yourself. Responsibility says, your healing is my job. And those two things are not the same. The empath starts realizing that true compassion doesn't mean carrying people. It means respecting their ability to carry themselves. It means allowing them to make choices, even when those choices lead to consequences. It means understanding that growth cannot be forced, borrowed, gifted, or rescued into existence. It must be chosen, and once the empath truly understands this, something inside them begins to shift. They stop chasing people toward change. They stop exhausting themselves trying to convince others to grow. They stop measuring their worth by how many people they can save, because they finally understand a truth that took years of pain to learn. You can offer someone a door, but you cannot make them walk through it. And the moment an empath accepts that reality is often the moment they begin reclaiming the energy they've spent giving away their entire life. This is the phase where the empath begins rebuilding their entire understanding of love. And honestly, this is where many people become confused, because from the outside, it can look like the empath is becoming colder, less available, less willing to help, less willing to fight for relationships. But that's not what's actually happening. For the first time in their life, they're learning the difference between love and attachment. And those two things are far more different than most people realize. For years, the empath believed that love meant holding on. Love meant staying no matter what. Love meant understanding every excuse, forgiving every mistake, and giving endless chances because that's what caring people do. If someone pulled away, they chased. If someone struggled, they carried them. If someone was hurting, they made it their mission to fix the pain. It felt like love. But after everything they've experienced in phase 2, a question begins forming in their mind. If this is love, why does it hurt so much? Why does caring about someone leave me emotionally exhausted? Why do I lose myself every time I try to save someone else? Why do relationships feel like emotional work instead of emotional connection? Those questions force the empath to look deeper than ever before. And what they discover is life-changing. Many of the things they called love were actually attachment. Attachment to being needed, attachment to being chosen, attachment to being important in someone's life, attachment to the idea that if they gave enough, eventually they would receive the same energy in return. This realization can feel shocking because attachment often disguises itself as love. Both involve strong emotions. Both involve deep connection. Both involve caring. But beneath the surface, they come from very different places. Love says, I care about you. Attachment says, I need you to behave a certain way so I can feel okay. Love gives freedom. Attachment fears freedom. Love respects choices. Attachment tries to control outcomes. Love allows people to be themselves. Attachment tries to hold on when it's time to let go. The empath begins seeing this pattern everywhere. In old relationships, in old friendships, even in their own behavior, they remember the times they couldn't stop thinking about someone who treated them badly. The times they stayed long after the relationship became unhealthy. The times they sacrificed their peace, trying to prevent someone from leaving, and suddenly they understand something they never understood before. That wasn't always love. Sometimes it was fear. Fear of abandonment. Fear of being alone. Fear of feeling unimportant. Fear of losing a connection they had invested so much of themselves into. This awareness changes everything, because now the empath starts approaching relationships differently. Instead of asking, how can I keep this person? They start asking, is this relationship healthy for both of us? Instead of asking, what do I need to do to make them stay? They start asking, are they choosing to stay on their own? Instead of chasing connection, they begin observing connection. Instead of forcing closeness, they allow it to happen naturally. And something remarkable happens. Relationships become lighter, healthier, more authentic. The empath no longer feels responsible for holding everything together. They stop treating every conflict like an emergency. They stop believing every ending is a failure. They stop measuring their worth by how much they can sacrifice. For the first time, they understand that real love doesn't require self-abandonment. Real love doesn't ask you to betray your boundaries. Real love doesn't demand that you carry another person's emotional responsibilities. In fact, real love often looks much calmer than attachment, less dramatic, less obsessive, less exhausting. And because it's calmer, many people mistake it for caring less. But the truth is exactly the opposite. The empath is finally learning how to love from a place of wholeness rather than a place of fear. They're learning how to care deeply without losing themselves, how to support without rescuing, how to connect without clinging, how to love without sacrificing their identity. And that lesson becomes the bridge between the person they used to be and the healed empath they are about to become. This is the phase the empath spent their entire life moving toward without realizing it. Not because they planned it, not because they read the right books or followed the perfect path. They arrive here because life leaves them no other choice. After the heartbreaks, after the disappointments, after the years of carrying people who refuse to carry themselves, after all the emotional exhaustion and painful awakenings, something finally changes. The empath gets tired, not tired of loving, not tired of caring, tired of abandoning themselves. And that single shift becomes the beginning of phase 3. This is where the healed empath starts emerging. What's interesting is that from the outside, many people think the healed empath has changed completely. Old friends may say they're different. Former partners may say they're distant. Some people may even accuse them of becoming selfish. But the truth is much simpler. The healed empath is no longer available for relationships that require self-sacrifice as the price of admission. And for people who benefited from their lack of boundaries, that change can feel threatening. For years, the empath was easy to access, easy to call, easy to lean on, easy to emotionally unload on. No matter how much they were carrying themselves, they always seemed willing to carry more. Now something feels different. The healed empath pauses before saying yes. They think before giving their energy away. They ask themselves questions they never asked before. Does this relationship feel balanced? Does this person respect my boundaries? Am I helping because I genuinely want to, or because I'm afraid of disappointing someone? Those questions become powerful filters, and suddenly, not everyone gets access anymore. This is often when certain people start disappearing. Not because the healed empath pushed them away, because the relationship was built on overgiving rather than mutual respect. When the endless emotional supply disappears, some people lose interest. At first, this can feel painful. The healed empath may wonder if they made a mistake. They may question whether they're becoming too guarded, too selective, too protective of their peace. But over time, something remarkable happens. The silence that once felt lonely starts feeling peaceful. The boundaries that once felt uncomfortable start feeling empowering. The space that once felt empty starts feeling healing. For the first time, the empath experiences life without constantly carrying everyone else's emotions. And the difference is almost shocking. They wake up with more energy, they think more clearly, they feel lighter. They begin noticing how much of their life was previously spent managing problems that were never theirs to solve. This is where their energy changes. Not louder, not harder. Calmer, the healed empath no longer feels the need to prove their goodness. They no longer need to rescue people to feel valuable. They no longer need external validation to confirm their worth. Their confidence comes from something deeper now, self-respect. And self-respect changes everything. Because once an empath develops self-respect, they stop negotiating with things that destroy their peace. They stop explaining boundaries to people who refuse to respect them. They stop chasing relationships that require constant sacrifice. They stop shrinking themselves to make others comfortable. For years, they believed being a good person meant giving endlessly. Now they understand that being a healthy person requires balance. They still care deeply. That never changes. They still feel compassion. They still want the best for people. But now their compassion includes themselves. That's the difference. The healed empath finally places themselves inside the circle of people they care about. And that changes the entire direction of their life. Because when an empath learns to protect their own energy, something beautiful happens. Their kindness becomes intentional rather than automatic. Their generosity becomes genuine rather than guilt-driven. Their relationships become mutual rather than one-sided. And perhaps for the first time ever, they experience a feeling that was impossible during the earlier phases: inner peace. Not because life became perfect, not because people stopped disappointing them, but because they stopped making their peace dependent on other people's choices. And that is the moment the empath stops surviving life and finally starts living it. This final phase is the one very few people ever fully understand. In fact, many people will look at the healed empath and completely misunderstand what they're seeing. Some will think they've become cold. Others will think they've stopped caring. Some may even believe they've changed into someone selfish. But the truth is much deeper than that. The healed empath hasn't stopped loving people. They've simply stopped losing themselves for people. And to those who only knew the old version of them, that difference can be difficult to accept. You have to remember where this journey started. In phase 1, the empath needed to be needed. Their value came from helping. Their identity came from rescuing. Their purpose came from carrying other people's emotional weight. Then phase 2 shattered that identity. It forced them to confront painful truths. It forced them to let go of unhealthy relationships. It forced them to discover who they were beneath all the emotional labor. Now, in phase 3, something remarkable has happened. The healed empath finally knows who they are. And once someone reaches that level of self-awareness, they stop seeking approval the way they once did. This is where many people become confused, because most of society quietly teaches us to seek validation, fit in, be liked, be accepted, avoid disappointing people, avoid upsetting people, avoid being misunderstood. The healed empath no longer lives by those rules. Not because they don't care about people, because they've learned something most people never learn. You can spend your entire life trying to make everyone understand you and still fail. So eventually, they stop trying, not in a bitter way, not in an angry way, in a peaceful way. They become comfortable with the fact that some people will never understand their boundaries. Some people will never understand their growth. Some people will never understand why they changed. And that's okay. Because the healed empath no longer needs universal approval to feel secure. This creates a kind of quiet strength that is hard to describe. They walk into rooms differently. They speak differently. They make decisions differently. Not because they're trying to appear confident, because they're no longer constantly questioning themselves. For years, every decision was filtered through one question: what will other people think? Now a different question guides their life. What feels true to me? That shift changes everything. They stop explaining themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. They stop arguing with people who only want access to their energy. They stop proving their worth to people who cannot see it. And perhaps most importantly, they stop feeling guilty for protecting their peace. This is why the healed empath often appears so calm, not because they've escaped pain, not because life suddenly became easy, because they've stopped fighting battles that don't belong to them. They've stopped carrying responsibilities that were never theirs. They've stopped trying to save people who refuse to save themselves. Their energy becomes incredibly focused, intentional, purposeful, and that energy often makes people uncomfortable. Why? Because the healed empath becomes a living reminder of something many people avoid: personal responsibility. No longer can others manipulate them through guilt. No longer can others control them through emotional pressure. No longer can others use their compassion against them. The healed empath still loves deeply. In fact, they often love more deeply than ever before. But now their love comes from abundance rather than need. Their kindness comes from strength rather than fear. Their compassion comes from wisdom rather than self-sacrifice. And that's why many people will never fully understand them, because most people only knew the version that gave endlessly. Very few get to meet the version that finally learned how to give without losing themselves. And in the end, the greatest transformation of the healed empath isn't that they stop caring about the world. It's that they finally learn how to walk through the world with an open heart while refusing to abandon themselves along the way.